So if we learned anything from Fukushima, when the plant operators and the Japanese government said everything's fine, everything's safe, and the independent studies found that 1.5 times at least the amount of radiation was actually released from the plant, and 70% was drained into the Pacific Ocean of the cesium, it's that maybe we can't always trust the plant operation groups, the corporations, the for-profit corporations, and even some of the oversight committees that are supposed to look at these plants and make sure everything's safe, make sure they're not leaking. And it's mainstream news, CBS News, you name it, that about 75% of nuclear sites now are leaking tritium. And this obviously is a radioactive component. The nuke sites around the world, but especially the United States, are leaking, period. It's an issue. No one wants to talk about it. The corporations that are running it all don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to have the liability, so they're saying it's fine. It's totally safe. All these sites around the world that are full of radiation, don't worry about it. It doesn't even exist. And that's not okay with me. It's not okay with Dr. Group, who's been researching this for 20 plus years. And it's not okay for any of us, because we actually have to talk about these issues. We can't pretend everything's fine. We're not the for-profit corporations behind this, and we're actually going to discuss what's really going on. So Dr. Group, thank you. It's always fun to sit in here and talk with you. So what's going on with all the nuke sites that are leaking around the country?
Well, Anthony, it is really sad that we have a toxic substance that we can't feel, that we can't see, that we can't taste, that is one of the most toxic substances known to man, and that's radioisotopes that are damaging to our cells, damaging to our body. And we have some of the worst scenarios right now around the world. Look what happened with Fukushima. I mean, Fukushima has been a disaster. It's been a cover-up. One of the least talked about radioisotopes is tritium. I mean, we hear about the cesium, we hear about the strontium-90, we hear about the iodine, the radioactive iodine. The problem is no one really knows when they have radiation poisoning. It's almost a slow death. The research that's coming out right now, though, is alarming, because tritium is really the best way to explain it is it's radioactive hydrogen. It's not like a cesium or some other element that if it gets in your body, it might go to the thyroid gland or it might affect the bones. The scary thing about tritium is it is legal for these nuclear power plants to produce and release tritium into the air. And they use it in the cooling system, so they use it in water. So you know water is a component of every living substance. Our bodies, everything that's alive is composed of at least 80% water. So tritium, because it is radioactive hydrogen, is easily absorbed through the air, so you can breathe it in. You swim in tritium-enriched waters, you're going to soak it in through your skin. It's now getting in the soil, and the plants are sucking it in through the water. It's scary because tritium actually affects the DNA inside your body. So it attacks every cell's DNA. It's not located in one area like other radioactive materials. So it's something that I wanted to bring the attention to everybody out there, because if you live in a 200-mile radius, let's say, of some sort of a nuclear reactor or nuclear power generating facility, most likely you're being exposed to radioactive materials. And doctors are not trained to diagnose people and say, hey, you know, we have all these tests that we can take, a blood test, or we can take saliva test, or we can x-ray you, which is damaging in itself, and determine that you have radioactive poisoning. So it's almost like a slow death, and people need to be aware of it and protect themselves from any type of radioactive substances that they might be exposed to on a regular basis.
It's a crazy thought, and I don't think that, you know, there's people just dropping dead from radiation poisoning or something from these plants, but the concept that they're just releasing things kind of unchecked, and that 75+% nuke sites are leaking tritium, or that I also saw that CBS and other agencies said, yeah, they're just kind of leaking, period. And there's something being done to fix them, but at the same time, it's such an industry that is so specific that most people aren't even researching. They have no idea what's going on, let alone, for example, people really finding out about Fukushima. It's become a huge issue and people are learning about it, but the percentage of the population that actually looks into it and actually does something about it is so small that these nuke site plants and even the Fukushima TEPCO operators can kind of get away with whatever. Like, let's say there is a leak and it's going into the groundwater. They can just say, oh, it's totally fine, you're totally safe. And there's an instance, we're going to talk to Joe, one of the producers around here too, about what happened with his family. I mean, there's nuke sites that just leak and they have disasters and they sit there forever. No one wants to pay to clean it up. No one wants the liability. And then people get sick, And that's the other thing too. It's hard, isn't it, to say, oh, well, this nuke site leaking actually caused my health problem, right? Just like everything else. It's all slow stuff. Like when you eat food that's crap, you eat the pesticides and the garbage in the food supply, and 20 years later you get cancer. There's links to it, obviously, but you can't say, oh, that sausage I ate 20 years ago gave me cancer, so the liability is kind of like, oh, it's not that. It's magic. None of that affected you in any way. It's wild. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been able to identify the majority of the toxins that are out there, and we can pinpoint, for example, what mercury does to the body. We can pinpoint what aluminum does. We can, there's studies out there that show what genetically modified foods do to the body. This is like the secret underground killer that no one's talking about, that everyone's afraid to talk about. And there's no solutions or no way to really track the fact that what this is doing to every single individual out there. I don't even think I think people that live near nuclear power plants are one thing. They're at extreme risk, especially their children. But we have a global situation right now. Fukushima, for example, is dumping millions of tons of water that's laced with tritium into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, the study found that 70% of the original cesium from the explosion went into the Pacific Ocean.
Right. I mean,
but then they say it's fine. They say it's totally fine. And I don't know all the specifics. They did find some radioactive stuff in the United States, obviously, right? But then they would say, you're crazy if you think it's an issue, if it's going into the oceans. There's nothing in the oceans that are dying from the 70% of cesium that went into the ocean. And there's like weird mutations around the site and stuff, but it's fine. I mean, do you think anyone actually believes that? Everything's fine. This also ties into, by the way, if viewers are watching and they're like, these people are crazy. They're saying that everyone is dying from radiation poisoning. We're not saying that. We're saying this is one of those slow underlying things that's actually contributing to health problems that no one's talking about because everyone's afraid to discuss it, because the corporations that are running this don't want to talk about it because liability, as we said a million times, and then also because the oversight committees and stuff, they don't want to blow up some huge story. Nobody wants a big scandal. This is real life, though. And if you're in a fairy tale scenario where everything's fine, Fukushima's fine, it didn't do anything, it didn't leak into the ocean, TEPCO has it under control, didn't they hire homeless people to go in with like duct tape and stuff? The robot they sent in to fix Fukushima died because of the high radiation levels. It's total insanity. But if you talk about it, that's bad. Everything is actually fine. You're right. If anyone's a doubter, you're right. It's totally safe. Let the tritium just be released into the air. Everything's fine. Do you think people really believe that, though? Do you really think that?
It's our job to identify the type of warfare that's going on against us, and that's how we protect ourselves. I mean, you have to learn math to be able to do your finances. So I think that there still are a lot of people that just don't want to believe what's going on in the environment. There's also, at the same time, a lot of good that's happening in the environment. How do you create change in the world?
And you call it warfare too, not to interrupt. But to some people, it might mean, oh, well, are the nuke people actually just trying to kill us? No, I don't think that's what we're saying at all. We're just saying that it's just like if you were running a business and you're making tons and tons of money, but you found out that one of your products was hurting people, okay? If you're a greedy, horrible CEO person or whatever, you don't care. You don't want to spend the extra 5 pennies. Like, let's say a fast food company doesn't want to spend 5 pennies extra per meal or whatever to enhance the quality and the ingredients of the food. They're like, no, that accounts to $10 million a year or whatever. I'm going to keep that money. You don't want it to get out that the ingredients in the food are actually harming people. And eventually it might come out, and they might have to actually do something about it, and it costs them money. So that's what it is to me. It is, we're suffering because of greedy people's decisions, because they don't want to lose the cash, they don't want the spotlight on them, So essentially it is attacking us. regardless of the motive, I think it's just they don't want to have the financial expenditures to deal with it, or they don't want to deal with the government oversight.
Well, it does actually come back to money, because I looked into that, and nuclear power plants are extremely profitable. Once they're up and running, it's pure money coming in. They know that they're dealing with compounds, radioactive compounds, that could take millions of years to, that they're going to have to hold in special types of cells and everything, like, to protect against leakage. The problem is that's going to cost them 100 times, 1,000 times more money than they're making from selling the power from the nuclear power plants. So it's first of all, we should have oversight. Our government should be protecting us, and just the word nuclear itself.
Build more.
Right. Now they just want to keep building and keep building and keep building. Let's get out of the technology 100 years ago, and let's move into Tesla's technology, or free energy technology that we've had and that's been suppressed since the 1950s, and move to a clean sources of energy that we can use without any damage, environmental damage or human damage in the future, because we're going to be dealing with this our whole lives, and our kids are going to be dealing with this, and their kids are going to be dealing with this, unless miraculously we figure out a way to neutralize these spent nuclear rods. It's going to be a concern for a long time.
It's just one more of those things where you take something that we really don't even know the full implications of, the full impact of, like the way we manipulate so much stuff, and we just blast it out and just hope it'll be okay, and there's not much oversight. And what's funny is I would be for nuclear power if they had clean, sustainable systems. They weren't leaking everywhere. There wasn't Fukushima, Chernobyl incidents. All of that is just playing poker with a really, really bad hand, just hoping, well, if we can produce the energy and make money for now, it's worth it in the long run. I've read articles from professors saying it'll be 100,000-year nuclear nightmare from Fukushima. Just Fukushima. Yeah. You know how many plants are leaking and on the verge of real issues? It's just so absurd. So, well, thank you very much for that research, and it's always fun to be invited as a guest here on Nightly News to chat. Dr. Group, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, well, I'm Anthony Gucciardi. I'm always excited and happy to be invited as a guest host on the InfoWars Nightly News. Now we're going to take you to break.
It has been nicknamed Chernobyl on the Hudson. Lying just 34 miles north of New York City's Central Park, the Indian Point Energy Center has been leaking the radioactive material known as tritium into the groundwater. On February 6, 2016, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo finally alerted the public as to the potential catastrophe. Better late than never? In 1973, the plant was shut down after engineers discovered buckling in the steel liner of the concrete dome in which the nuclear reactor is housed. On October 17, 1980, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission proposed a $2,100,000 fine for an incident involving 100,000 gallons of Hudson River water that had leaked into the Indian Point 2 containment building from the fan cooling unit, undetected by a safety device designed to detect hot water. Two pumps which should have removed the water were found to be inoperative. In 1984, the New York Times reported that 25% of the young fish known as the Atlantic tomcod and 89% of the older Atlantic tomcod inhabiting the Hudson suffered from liver cancer. These mutated tomcods had evolved after GE dumped PCBs into the Hudson River from 1947 to 1976. In 2005, Entergy workers, while digging, discovered a small leak in a spent fuel pool. Water containing tritium and strontium-90 was leaking through a crack in the pool building and then finding its way into the nearby Hudson River. In 2007, a transformer at Unit 3 caught fire, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission raised its level of inspections. In April of 2007, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission fined the owner of the Indian Point nuclear plant $130,000 for failing to meet a deadline for a new emergency siren plan. The 150 sirens at the plant were meant to alert residents within 10 miles to a plant emergency. In 2009, an International Journal of Health Services study revealed that residents living on the Hudson had a 67% higher thyroid cancer rate than the national average. In 2010, an explosion occurred in a main transformer for Indian Point 2, spilling oil into the Hudson River. Entergy later agreed to pay a $1.2 million penalty for the transformer explosion. In July of 2013, a former supervisor who worked at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant for 29 years was arrested for falsifying critical safety records and lying to federal regulators. In June of 2015, a Mylar balloon floated into a switch yard, causing an electrical problem resulting in the shutdown of Reactor 3. In July of 2015, Reactor 3 was again shut down after a water pump failure. On December 5th, 2015, Indian Point 2 was shut down after several control rods lost power. Obviously, Indian Point could potentially be a repeat of the, at the very least, Level 7 Fukushima Daiichi disaster if a nuclear meltdown occurs due to a hurricane or other natural event leading to equipment failures. However, a similar disaster would require the evacuation of 5.6 million people and render Manhattan a no-go zone for decades. In 2004, a study by the Union of Concerned Scientists estimated as many as 44,000 near-term deaths from acute radiation syndrome and as many as 518,000 long-term cancer deaths could occur in people within 50 miles of Indian Point in the event of a severe accident.
So it's one thing to read the studies in the news and all that kind of stuff about the nuclear reactor sites and what it's been done to families and everything like that, but to actually hear someone's personal story is another deal. And the technical director of the Nightly News, Joe Jennings, is in here with me right now along with Dr. Group, because he grew up and worked next to a nuclear disaster site. And he's going to share the full details, but he has a very, very sad story about what happened to a family member of his that he thinks is related. And also, it's pretty insane how now they're building houses on the old nuclear site. They didn't clean it up. And the people who are buying the houses there have to sign waivers saying, oh, everything's fine, you know. And he's got a lot to share. And Dr. Group is here because he's been researching this for over 20 years, and we're going to get his take on it as well. So, guys, thanks. And as always, I'm excited to be a guest host tonight and talk with you guys. So, Joe, tell me exactly, to bring people up to speed, what happened, where you grew up, and what went on there.
So I grew up in Thousand Oaks, California. Went to high school there, everything like that. My father worked in that area. It is just, I would say, northeast of Simi Valley, the Santa Susana Pass. I also worked in Simi Valley, right? I could look at the Santa Susana Pass where they were testing rocket engines. You always knew they were testing because your house would shake. That's where they tested most of the space programs, engines for the shuttle, for any kind of rockets. It was called at one time Rocketdyne, owned by Rockwell International. Now NASA bought it. Now Boeing owns it. So it's changed hands over the years. But in the 1950s, that's where they had a Site 4, which was several experimental nuclear reactors. Those were put next to the rocket engines and stuff like that. They were doing all kinds of testing there. Do you think anybody knew that there were experimental, other than the workers, experimental nuclear reactors right there in their neighborhood? Nobody knew. So basically what happened was in 59, the reactor broke and started building up giant amounts of radioactive gas inside the reactor. It was going to melt down like Chernobyl.
And of course, they didn't tell anybody.
No, they didn't tell anybody. They said, open the doors and let the gas out for weeks while they were fixing these reactors. Open the doors, let the gas out. Well, in the Santa Susana Pass, that's a very windy, that's where a lot of airflow from California goes through. It goes through one way, it goes through the other way. It gets pushed by the coastal winds. So it's like spraying toxins in an air vent. So all those toxins went all over the areas, into Topanga Canyon, into Northridge, large, huge areas of people. That was on one side. Now you have Thousand Oaks, Westlake, Simi Valley, farms, Santa Paula. All these are farms. These are crops that we eat every day, from strawberries to tomatoes to oranges, avocados. Huge swaths of land because the soil is rich.
So tell me what happened when you were growing up in the area, your firsthand experience.
My firsthand experience is my dad was a general contractor. We did a lot of remodeling of homes. So what we would do is we would come into these homes and they'd want their houses repainted or whatever, but they didn't want the wood replaced. They wanted you to sand down 30, 40 years of paint back down to the wood so that you could repaint it so that you didn't have that kind of gross looking repainted wood look.
Right.
So we would go in there and sand all this stuff down. We'd also repair stuff in the homes and stuff like that. So after the Northridge earthquake, which was massive, as we know, a lot of soil and dust and contaminants and everything were coming out of most of these homes that were built in the 50s. Nobody said anything about that. Lots of people went and worked on these homes, made, good money remodeling these homes, fixing, repairing.
Including you.
Including me. I was working with my dad, and at no point did my dad say, "Oh, that might be bad."
Right.
No. Oh,
so
here, son, here's a sander.
No one said anything about it. You were taking off the lead paint from the 50s.
Yes.
Just ripping up the houses.
Yeah.
With all the gases that were released all over the place.
Oh yeah. And just here's a sander. Here's one of those little tiny masks dust mask. Have at it, son. Get the work done. Let's do it.
So what happened?
So years later, I would say a year and a half ago, we get the call that he's sick. And I was like, it's Dad. He's not, what's wrong with him? He's just being, a panty waste. That's what they would call it. And the doctor said, no, he has a tumor. And I said, a tumor? A brain tumor? They're like, yeah, he has a glioblastoma. And it was, when he was diagnosed, it was very small. It grew within 6 months to the size of a baseball in his head. So basically what it did was it just slowly stopped functions in his body. In our family, there's no history of any kind of brain tumor cancers, anything like that, ever. So my family are sitting back going, where did this come from? Did he get into something when he was younger? Because he partially grew up in San Antonio near, maybe there was something in San Antonio that was bad. But none of us could figure out. Then I see this story because nobody had it. We don't know where it came from. It happens. So I see this story on NBC and I go, oh my gosh, we were living near a nuclear reactor and nobody knew about it. Now, I can't say yes or no that it caused this, but the proof in all of the letters is what shows. He had a rare brain cancer, which was typically caused by radiation exposure. I could have a brain cancer. I don't know yet. It just suddenly appeared when he was 69 years old. So it just sickens me that the government did this, and what they told the people was, don't say a word. You're sworn to secrecy. Don't tell your families. Don't tell anybody that this happened. And we have proof here, which NBC4 News has brought out, internal letters from Rocketdyne talking about the pollution that Dr. Group was talking about, the cesium, the tritium that's leaking into the groundwater. And guess what? Nobody wants to pay for it because the lobbyists have paid off all of the EPA and Energy Commission people to say, oh, well, we cleaned it up. What they did was they took the reactors out, they scarred the site off, and they left.
And now people are building houses on top of it.
But they're building neighborhoods. There is a huge camp at the base of it that 30,000 kids a year go to. And what did they do? Well, we know it's contaminated. We'll just buy some of that land.
Dr. Group, what do you think about all this?
I think it's just a sick cover-up. I mean, that's why we're here, to try to bring awareness to these kind of things. I mean, it's a sad story. It makes me think that how many people and how many kids since the 1950s have died because of this, and how many people are going to be affected and sick forever because radiation can just stay in your bodies. I mean, the half-life of some radioactive materials are millions of years. I mean, the tritium alone is 12 years. It attacks the DNA, and it affects you slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly, and causes cancer and causes thyroid problems and causes all different kinds of diseases. It's just really sad that, our government, state governments, corporations that just make a ton of money and then put a layer of dirt over it and then sell it to somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping that we can create change in the world and let people know about these things. And hopefully somebody will invent a way to neutralize radiation, a good, effective means to do that, because that would save so many lives in the future and now, today.
Absolutely. And I think the saddest part is the fact that, it's very sad what happened to your dad. And even if it's unrelated, it's very sad. But period, them not saying anything about the plant being there, about the damage that was happening, about the disaster, and then just covering it with dirt and having people build houses on it and sign waivers. That is really, really disturbing. Well, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story. Tell you what, I am blown away at this story. Really, really disturbing stuff.